Mark today, Mark chapter 6, a very familiar. Today will be Mark chapter 6. We're going to start in verse 30 and continue through verse 44. If you are able, I ask that you would join me in standing for the reading of God's word. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now growing late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages to buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread to give them something to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5, and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing, and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. Thank you. You may be seated.
Great to see you. We are set up a little different this time, this week. We've already set up, we're so well prepared. We've set up for the missions conference a week early. So if you're watching online, you may not have seen Jason standing down here, but you heard his thunderous voice. And we've got tables set up, and everybody's comfortable. And then by the time we do the missions conference next week, you'll be really comfortable and you won't want to go back to sitting in regular chairs. So don't get too spoiled. But anyway, we're excited. And if you are watching online wondering what we're talking about, because of the weather, we moved our missions conference to next week. And so Saturday night at 5 o'clock, we'll have a great meal together. And then the program for Saturday night is going to be awesome. We'll hear from a bunch of our missionaries by video and some of them live. And then hear from Scott Brady, who you'll really enjoy. So it starts at 5 this year instead of 5:30. And then Sunday morning, we'll have a breakfast. The feeding of the multitudes, we're going to do that Saturday night and Sunday morning. So, and then we'll have 2 programs during the Sunday school hour and then during the main service hour. It's going to be a great weekend, and I just can't wait for it to get here. You might pray that Scott can get here from Philadelphia. I think he's snowed under right now. But anyway. Well, it's great to have you, and I've been preparing this week kind of like the Denver Broncos stand-in quarterback, Jarrett Stidham, who is playing quarterback today in place of Bo Nix. Bo Nix, as many of you Auburn fans remember, was the quarterback at Auburn and then Oregon, and he's been the hero for the Broncos this year. And then the last week, on the last play of the game, he broke his ankle. But they went to Jared Stidham right after that announcement and said, "Are you going to be able to win the championship game to get into the Super Bowl?" And he said, "I've been preparing for this all year. I'm ready to go." Well, as I was thinking about this week and whether the weather was coming or not, I thought, I've got to be like Jared Stidham and say, I've got to be ready to go even if we cancel church on Sunday. And of course, as you know, we've had beach-like weather here, no chance of canceling. So here we go. Warren Wiersbe tells the story of the late newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst, who invested a fortune collecting art treasures from all around the world. One day, Mr. Hearst found a description of some valuable items that he felt he must have. So he sent his agent abroad to find them. After months of searching for these items, the agent reported that he had finally found the treasures Mr. Hearst was demanding. They were in Mr. Hearst's warehouse. Hearst had been searching frantically for these treasures that he already owned. He had apparently forgotten what seemed to be so valuable to him. We laugh at someone who's so rich that they can't remember what they own. And wouldn't that be a great problem to have? Yet the same thing can happen to us, even if we're not rich. We can forget very easily. As we age, most of us who are aging, we're all aging, of course, but those of us on the upper end of things start noticing that we forget things. We forget our keys. We forget why we came into the bedroom, what we're looking for, what I come in here for, and what is my name, by the way. Forgetting is a part of our fallen human nature. But it's also a part of our fallen spiritual nature. We tend to forget very easily. We forget what God has done for us. We forget God's blessings to us, His answers to prayer in the past, times He's healed us or healed a friend or a loved one. We forget about His gifts of encouragement to us from other people and from different circumstances He brings into our life to bless us, to remind us that He knows us and He loves us. And then we forget. We often think, this was so special, I will never forget it. But years later or months later, we do. We come to a very familiar story today that Jason just read for us, and actually it's one of a series of stories. The feeding of the 5,000. We've all heard sermons on the feeding of the 5,000. And Jason read to us from Mark chapter 6. But a couple of chapters later, in Mark chapter 8, we read of the feeding of the 4,000. Did you know that there are two of these stories? Did you know there are two feedings of the multitudes? One is 5,000, the feeding of the 5,000 in chapter 6 of Mark. The other is the feeding of the 4,000 in chapter 8. Some critics believe that Mark and Matthew got confused and that they've told these two stories. And yet that is not true because they're in different locations. There are all kinds of different specifics in these stories. And as Jesus was combing the countryside and had multitudes following him everywhere he went, there were probably many other stories of crowds and him feeding them. But we specifically have these two stories. It's interesting, the story of the feeding of the 5,000 is the one miracle story that is told in all four of the Gospels. However, two of those Gospels, Luke and John, only tell the story of the 5,000, but Matthew and Mark tell both stories. And they tell them in a way that we're going to see today. They are connected. The one, the feeding of the 5,000, which comes first, is to prepare them for other lessons that they need to learn. And we'll see when we get to the feeding of the 4,000, they've forgotten. How could you forget the feeding of the 5,000? Us 21st century Christians rise up and say, you disciples are not nearly as spiritual as we are. How could you forget something so significant that God has done in your presence? And yet, we're here today to see ourselves in this story, in this series of stories. For some reason, this feeding of the 5,000 gets all the attention. This feeding of the 4,000, many people don't even realize that's there. I guess it's just because, feeding 4,000 is not that big of a deal. Let me tell you, we're counting heads for how many we're going to feed next Saturday night. It's nowhere near 4,000, but anytime you have a multitude together, you've got to figure out how many there are. So feeding 5,000, feeding 4,000, it's very significant. And it would be impossible for most of us. And as we've said before, when we went through the Gospel of John, we talked about the feeding of the 5,000 in John 6. And we've said in both cases, the 5,000 or the 4,000, it was actually more like 10 to 15,000 because only the men are counted. By the time you add in the women and children, you're talking about 10 to 15,000 most likely. Staggering numbers. Who could feed such a crowd like this? Only God Himself. God in the flesh. If you were in the crowd when Jesus took the little boy's lunch and fed 15,000 people, do you think you'd ever forget it? Of course not. And yet, that's what this story is about. As we said, these two feedings are connected. We have a problem, just like the disciples did, of not connecting what God has done with my present circumstance. I worry because I don't think it's going to work out this time. And I worry because I don't connect my present situation with the past blessings of God. We're disconnected. The sermon title for today is, Don't You Get It? And we don't many times. Here's the main idea we want to look at today. If we do not apply the lessons of the past, our memory of God's faithfulness, will not last. If we do not apply the lessons of the past, our memory of God's faithfulness will not last. The Gospel of Mark, which is where we're reading from today, is the shortest gospel, as many of you know, 16 chapters. And it is a fast-moving little book. Mark seems to be in a hurry. Many have described the stories in the book of Mark like a quick movie scene where Mark is running from scene to scene with a camera and putting together a video for us of Jesus' ministry. Or it's like a documentary where you see bits and pieces all come together to tell a story. The key word of Mark is immediately. 35 times in 16 chapters, this word immediately shows up. Mark seems to be in a hurry. Everything's immediately. He doesn't have time to tell us about the story of the birth of Jesus. He leaves that to Matthew and Luke. He's in a hurry. He starts with John the Baptizer crying out in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord." He gives 8 verses to John. Then verse 9 says, Jesus is baptized by John. He comes up out of the water, and it says, immediately he sees the heavens being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. A voice cries out from heaven, "You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased." And then it says, immediately, there's number 2 out of 35, the Spirit drives him into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. We're just a few verses into the book, and he's already in the wilderness, in the desert, being tempted by the devil. Mark gets to the point immediately. In other words, it's on. This kingdom that Jesus announces is here to conquer Satan's kingdom. And Satan is not going to let him do it without his attention. So, let me get back to where I was there. Mark is going to give us these stories. The feeding of the 5,000 is in the midst of all these other stories between chapter 6 and 8. And he is going to give us application of these 2 feeding stories especially. So the question today is for us, do we apply what we've learned? Do we make connection between what God has done in the past and what our circumstances are in the present? So as we look at this story that Jason read for us, the first thing we notice before we get to the feeding is Jesus' concern for his disciples. If you've got your Bible, look at chapter 6, verses 30 to 32, where we started reading. And if not, look at the screen here. But the first thing we see is Jesus' concern for his disciples. We see in verse 30 that the disciples are returning to Jesus, and they told him all that they had done and taught. And we see here that Jesus has sent them, as we see earlier than this, that he has sent them on their first missions trip. He sends them out 2 by 2 to do ministry for the first time. And now they're coming back to tell him, you won't believe what happened. We just sent Nathan Starzl to Costa Rica. He's been there less than a week, and he's already been ministering in that culture there with the ministry we're going to work with in Costa Rica. And every picture that Tamara has sent us, he's busy involved in his missions trip. If he comes back tomorrow, he's going to be there 3 months, but if he came back tomorrow, he would say, let me tell you about what happened. Well, that's the way missions trips are. And Jesus sends these guys out. They return, and they can't wait to tell him all that they had done and all that they had taught. And Jesus is excited for them. In one of the other Gospels, he says, I saw Satan being cast down from heaven in the works that you were doing. In other words, we're winning over Satan, and he's excited. But he's also got concern for his disciples. Look what he says in verse 31. He says to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. This just shows us the tenderness of Jesus with his disciples, his balance, his seeing their need for balance. And he brings them in like a coach at halftime and says, take a break. Get some Gatorade, let's talk about it, and then we'll go out again. Take a rest. We're going to see in a minute that he sees what's happening here as a shepherd looking at sheep who have no shepherd. And this story is a reminder that he's the good shepherd. And the good shepherd leads us beside still waters. The good shepherd tells us there's a time to lay down in the grass and rest. When you think of Jesus, when you think of the Christian life, do you look at it as guilt-driven, harshness, get a job, do the work, and don't let up because Jesus is going to be mad at you? The first thing we see here is Jesus' concern for these guys to take a break. It's a beautiful thing. And it shows us his wisdom as the good shepherd and his grace as the good shepherd. There's a need for balance. Danny Aiken said, some people rust out in ministry because they're lazy. Others burn out because they never take a break. There's a beautiful balance here in serving Jesus. Vance Havner said it this way: if you don't come apart, like he says, you will come apart. One of the things about ministry, whether it's working in the nursery, whether it's teaching kids, whether it's being a deacon, working in the kitchen, or decorating like this, is the danger of burning out and feeling like I am not getting paid for this, I'm doing all this as a volunteer, and I sure hope Jesus is watching because I'm tired. Well, Jesus is watching, and he says, take a break. Come apart into this desolate place. They were up around the Sea of Galilee in an area that is desolate. And he said, let's go here and take a break. It's his concern for his disciples. So they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. The next thing we see in the next verse is not just his concern for his disciples, but his compassion for the multitudes. They come floating along in the boat, ready to take a break in this desolate place, and guess what? Now, many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. Let's just pause right there. Can you imagine as they're coming in on the boat, ready to take a Sabbath break, and they see these people running? The word is out about Jesus, as we can tell from what's getting ready to happen, the feeding of the 10,000 to 15,000. And these people start running when they see the boat coming in. There he is. He's got his guys with him. Let's go see him again. Can you imagine Jesus' words and the disciples' feelings? That feeling you have when you come home and you're ready to rest and the kids want to play. The idea here could be very easily that Jesus would say, "Oh my word, look who's coming." That would be our natural reaction. But his reaction is he had compassion on them. He's got concern for his own. But he's got compassion on them. Why? Because they are like sheep without a shepherd. What a picture this is. This is a picture from the Old Testament in several places where the people are wandering around, just like unbelievers are today, wondering what it's all about. They don't have a shepherd in their life to direct them, to feed them, to comfort them. They're just trying to make it on their own. And Jesus looks out at them. He doesn't get mad at them for obstructing his time and his disciples' time. He is compassionate toward them. As a matter of fact, Ezekiel 34 is the chapter where the shepherds of Israel, the preachers, the ministry people, are not being good shepherds. And Ezekiel gives it to them all through chapter 34. And then it says this: there is coming a person. It's going to be God himself. I myself will be the shepherd of the sheep. When Ezekiel's Jewish audience read that, they weren't thinking of Jesus in the flesh, being God in the flesh yet. They hadn't put that all together. But this is God saying, I am going to be the shepherd of my sheep. And I myself will make them lie down, declares the Lord God. I will seek the lost, and I will bring back the strayed, and I will bind up the injured. I will strengthen the weak. This is what a good shepherd does. And when we get to John 10, we find out who the good shepherd is. Jesus is the one who is the good shepherd. So when he looks at people who are wandering around, he's not angry at them. He wants to minister to them, to seek them out, bring them back, bind up their injuries, and strengthen the weak. The point of this story is not just that people get fed. The story is that they are amazed and fall in love with the God in the flesh, good shepherd, who's feeding his sheep. He has concern for his disciples. He has compassion for the multitude. And then Jesus has a challenge for the disciples. Look at verse 35, where it says, when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, this is a desolate place. That word keeps showing up because another thing that's going on here is, as John tells us, Jesus is the new Moses. He's the better Moses. Moses, he tells us in John 6, fed you manna that fell from heaven. But I am here, and I came down from heaven, and I am who you feed on now. Eat my flesh and drink my blood. That sounds pretty gross, but he is saying, I am the bread from heaven that will give you meaning and sustenance and fulfillment in your life if you feed on me, who I am. So there's a picture of Moses in the desolate places of the desert for 40 years, feeding the manna. He didn't make the manna. He only delivered it. But Jesus comes down and says, I came from heaven, and I am the manna that will fill your life. So he's the good shepherd. He represents the Moses who was was pointing toward him. It also represents what's going to happen in the future at the marriage supper of the Lamb. He is going to be in charge of satisfying all of us for all eternity. This story is full of layers of meaning. It's not just somebody getting lunch for free. He has compassion on the multitudes, but then he gives this challenge to his disciples. They come to him and say, hey, Jesus, this teaching's been great, but it's getting late. Sometimes people say that to me at 12:05. My wife says that to me when we get home for lunch, so you're not alone. But he tells them, they tell him, look, we're in a desolate place, it's late, so we got to send these people away to the surrounding countryside and the villages. This is their suggestion of how to solve the problem. Warren Wiersbe points out they have two suggestions. First of all, send these people away so they can deal with their problem and get their food. Sounds practical, sounds humanistic. It's the way we deal with problems and problem people. Let's send them away and let them take care of their situation. The problem is all the stores are closing around the desolate place there. And the lines in the grocery store are going to be really crowded with 15,000 people crashing on it. The other suggestion is let's raise enough money to buy a little bit of bread for everyone. When Jesus says, you give them something to eat, here's his answer, and they say, how much is this going to cost? Shall we go and buy 200 denarii, which is about almost a year's salary for the average worker there? That's what it's going to cost, Jesus, to feed all these people. This is crazy. Those are our natural reactions. Send these people away and let them deal with their problem, answer number one. Number two, I'll throw a few dollars at it and we'll get it out of our hair. But notice Jesus' answer. You give them something to eat. Again, notice the balance. We just talked about him saying, take a break. And now he's saying, get involved. It's a beautiful balance because Jesus knows if you just take a break all the time, you're not going to enjoy the Christian life. He could have instantly taken care of this situation. But instead, he involves his guys. He could solve all the problems in our broken country and our local scene as well. But instead, he gets us involved and works through us. The beautiful balance of saying, you give them something to eat. Well, that sounds good, but where are we going to get 200 denarii worth of bread? We just can't do this, Jesus. And he says, that's the point. So we have Jesus' concern for his disciples, his compassion for the audience, his challenge to the disciples, and then we have the completion of the miracle. And this is where you see that it is pointing back to Moses and pointing forward to the great supper, which is just a picture of what heaven's going to be. Just like a great Thanksgiving meal that just goes on and on and on. You know how Thursday night on Thanksgiving you're just sick because you've overdone it again? And then you've watched football all day and you go to bed miserable. In heaven, it just goes on and on and on. Here's what it does. The completion of the miracle. He says, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. The loaves, John tells us, are barley loaves, which is the bread that was for the poorest of the poor. It was the coarsest bread, and it was cheap. And the loaves that the little boy had were the cheap loaves. And the fish were most likely sardine size, little salt fish that was used as jelly to spread onto the barley loaf. How meager can you get? There's one kid in the crowd of 15,000 whose mom thought ahead and packed a lunch for him. But it's the poorest of the poor. God is showing us, I can work through anybody in any situation if we're willing. God can use you and me, and you feel like I work on a job, I just do secular stuff, or I'm a housewife, there's nothing I can do, and God says, I can do anything through somebody who says, I'm available. And he commanded them all to sit down in groups in the green grass. This is another picture of Moses in the desert. In the book of Numbers, it shows how all the tribes were broken up very succinctly into their camps and orderly. 3 camps in the north of the campsite, another 3 to the east, another 3 to the south, the other 3 to the west. And Jesus organizes this group to sit down in the groups in the green grass. They sat down in groups by hundreds and fifties. Notice how organized he is. He puts it together like this, like Moses did in the wilderness. And then taking these 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looks up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves. Notice Jesus himself, God in the flesh, takes time to say, this is a gift from heaven. Thank you, Father, for this, before he breaks it. It doesn't mean we have to be legalistic about saying a prayer of some significance before every meal, although that's good to do. But it's just a great reminder that Jesus himself says, I need to thank the Father for this before I do something because I am God in the flesh. So he just covers all the bases. And he gave them to the disciples to set before the people. Again, he uses them. He probably could have gone around to all 15,000 people, but he says, here's where I need you guys. You can handle this. Spread it out. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. It's just funny the way he says that. 15,000, I've got a couple sardines here, and I'm going to spread them out. And they all ate and were satisfied. This is a phrase used here for the 5,000 feeding. It's used again in chapter 8 for the 4,000 people. It's a reminder also again of the wilderness people going out to gather up the manna. The name manna meant, what is this? Can you imagine that first time when it came down and they say, what in the world has fallen from the sky? Sadly, after 40 years, they didn't feel that way about it anymore. But when they first began to partake of it, they were satisfied and they were full. And they took up an overflowing 12 baskets full of broken pieces in the fish. Why did that happen? Why didn't Jesus just get exactly how many? Well, it's because, as he says in chapter 8, he has done all things good. He goes over the limit in his blessings to us. It's not just eat this and don't ask for seconds because we don't have enough. It's overflowing. They have to go pick up 12 baskets. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. So this is his completion of the miracle. But as we come to the end of this story, which is so awesome, there is one concerning hint in verses 49 to 52. Right after the feeding of the 5,000, John tells us that the crowd is so excited about what Jesus has done that they try to make him king. They try to carry on a coronation right there. And John tells us, he tells the disciples, get in the boat now, and tells them to get out into the sea. And then he goes up on the mountain to pray. He rejects being their political king. But the other thing that's going on is this leads into the story of the walking on the waves. They are out in the water, and he's up praying for them, and he looks down and sees them struggling in the storm. And just to skip ahead a little bit, in verses 49, he comes walking on the sea, and they thought it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified. Just a few minutes ago, they were all satisfied and joyful. Look what God has done in a desolate place. And now they're not satisfied, they're terrified. But immediately, there's that word again. He spoke to them as he's walking on the waves. Take heart, it is I. Now, we don't see that in English, but in Greek, it's that phrase we talked about so many times in John. Ego eimi, which means I am. I am Yahweh, God in the flesh, the voice that spoke to Moses in the burning bush. And Moses says, who do I tell the people sent me? And he says, tell them the I am has sent you. All the way through the Gospels, Jesus says this, especially in the Gospel of John, as we saw. Ego eimi. Take heart, be encouraged. Ego eimi, it's me. I am. Do not be afraid. And then it says, he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded. Can you imagine what that was going on? But notice how Mark uses this phrase. It's not high-fiving astonishment. It is fearful astonishment, for they did not understand about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. What is Mark telling us? What do the loaves have to do with Jesus walking on the water and looking like a ghost that's scaring them to death? And what do the loaves have to do with the wind suddenly stopping when he gets in the boat? They forgot about the loaves. They didn't connect the loaves to their present terrified situation. And then he says this phrase at the end, their hearts were hardened. This is what we call the great disconnect. They are not connecting what Jesus did just a few hours ago with the crisis that they're having in the present tense. They've already forgotten who they're dealing with. He's a ghost now. He terrifies us. He astonishes us. But we don't make the connection. Isn't this wonderful? God in the flesh is over all of nature, and He can calm a storm, and He can walk on waves, and He can climb into our boat and save us. Instead, their hearts are hardened. How does that happen? You and I would not have been a part of that company, would we? Mark is writing this for us, not just to tell us about them. Then he shifts to the feeding of the 4,000 in chapter 8. And we'll have to go quickly here because lunchtime is coming. But we see in Mark 7 the three different kinds of faith response, and I'll just refer to these quickly. The first one is this story of the Canaanite woman. Jesus leaves Galilee and he goes up to an area called Tyre and Sidon, which is up on the northwest coast. If you look at this map here, right where it says Jesus' ministry, underneath that little white circle there, and just above it are Tyre and Sidon. This is Jezebel's area, where Jezebel came from. It's an area of Canaanites who want nothing to do with the God of Israel. They are Baal worshipers in the Old Testament, and they want nothing to do with Jesus, this Jewish rabbi, except this one woman who has determination in her faith. And she comes to this man and says, I've got a little daughter who has an unclean spirit, and I've heard about you, and I came and I fell down at your feet. This woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician woman from Jezebel's country by birth. And she is begging him to cast a demon out of her daughter. Can you imagine the desperation of this woman? And Jesus tests her with something that sounds awful, but it is the language of the day. He's not being racist here, but he is testing her and says, listen, my blessings are for the people of Israel first. We got to feed the children first. For it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. That's what the Jewish people called the Gentiles, especially Syrophoenicians. Jezebel's folks. They're dogs. God wants nothing to do with them. They want nothing to do with him. And Jesus says, I came to minister to the Jewish family first, and then it'll spread over to the Gentiles. And she says, yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. What is she saying? Just give me a little bit. My daughter is possessed by a demon. Please, I know I'm not in the club, but please have mercy on me. Just some crumbs. And Jesus, who does all things good, says, for this statement, you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter, and she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. It's a great picture of determined faith. He contrasts that with the disbelief of the Pharisees. a little bit later. And they are saying, why don't you give us a sign? They came to him and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign. You've got this Gentile woman who doesn't know anything about this Jewish rabbi, except she's been told he can help you. And then you've got these guys who know the whole Old Testament, and they say, give us a sign. He's been giving them signs for 3 years. He just fed 5,000 people. He's getting ready to feed 4,000 more. He's full of signs. But they are full of unbelief. But then we get to the disconnect of the disciples. You got this strong, determined woman, and we have these argumentative Pharisees. The disciples have forgotten to bring bread. They are in the boat. They've gotten back into the boat after this encounter with the Pharisees. And they only grabbed one loaf out of all these that were available. But they got the one loaf, and they're in the boat. And he cautioned them, after he's just been talking to these Pharisees, and he says, watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees. What is leaven? Leaven is what is left over from previous bread and put into a new loaf, and it spreads. And it's used all the way through the scriptures of sin, sinful motives that can ruin us, that can get inside of us and blind us to our sinfulness. He says, beware of becoming like the Pharisees, who don't get it, who don't want it. And the leaven of Herod, who is all about power in this life. When he uses that picture, they begin discussing with themselves the fact that they don't have any bread. The disciples are always thinking very literally when Jesus is talking spiritually. And they think, he's upset with us. We forgot to bring enough bread for all of us. Do you get the irony? Do you remember when we didn't have enough bread for 15,000 of us? There's 12 of us in the boat, 13 with him. He's upset with us. And Jesus, aware of this, says to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? This isn't about bread. Don't you get it? Do you not perceive or understand? The word perceive there is a word that means to connect, to put together. Can you not put together what you just saw with what we're doing now? Don't you get it, guys? And then he says, are your hearts hardened? The first part of that sounds like a mental issue. Have you forgotten? But the second part shows it's a heart issue. Your heart is hard. It's interesting, the word harden there is used in two different ways. There's a beautiful way. When a little grain falls into an oyster, the oyster takes over and it hardens and it becomes a beautiful pearl. But another use of it is when something gets wrong with your system and your body creates what we call a kidney stone. Those are two pictures of hardening, and Jesus is referring to the kidney stone blockage that blocks you from seeing what's going on spiritually. Your hearts are hardened. Remember how compassionate and concerned Jesus is for these guys. He loves them. He's not just trying to belittle them, but he is challenging them, saying, where is your heart? Do you not get it? Do you not connect what you've seen with the present circumstance? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? They say 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they say 7. They got it together mentally there, but he says, do you not understand? Do you not get it? Let me close with this story. Let me close with this challenge. Those of us who see God answer our prayers, who see God do amazing things for us, but then tend to forget it, I want to encourage you to keep a journal, write down what God does for you, tell stories to your children of what God's done for you. I have this card here, and I showed this years ago. But Becky and I were in a situation where we were between jobs and we're at one of the poorer points of our married life. We've had a few poor times, but this one just seemed to go on and on. Somebody gave us, and I don't even remember who, gave us this gift card for Chicken Express, which was a little fast food place in Midlothian, Texas. And it was for about 25 bucks, I think. And we went and used this a few times. And back then, you could get a Chicken Express meal for $5. So we were going to use this until it burned out. But we were also praying, Lord, you got to help us get the job that we need. Well, you got to help us. We're trying to pay bills. And we were praying fervently about this. And this card made its way down to $12 and then to $7 or $8. And we went to the window, the drive-through window, and gave it to the lady. And she gave us our chicken, and then she gave us card back and said, you've got $22.17 left. And we said, what? No, that can't be right. And we've been using it. We're down to $7 now, right? No, that's what it says. You just take it. We said, okay. It had to be a mistake, but we came back the next night just in case, and they said, okay, you've got $15 left. And it went down again. And 2 or 3 times, this card magically increased. I've never had a gift card that did that. But this card sits in my desk, in my drawer, and I'm going to have Becky, and then you hold me accountable on this, to take it to Hobby Lobby and put it in a frame. Because I don't always see it in the drawer. But every time I do open the drawer, I'm reminded God's provision several years ago connects to my situation now. And this is proof of it. It may look like silly proof, but we were really hungry. And it really was true that it was God's provision. I don't know why Chicken Express mixed up the records. As a matter of fact, they went out of business not too long after that. So maybe something was going wrong. But it was the sovereignty and goodness of God to me and Becky. I hate that the whole place came down for our sake, but this is proof that we can connect God's goodness to our situation. If we do not apply the lessons of the past, our memory of God's faithfulness will not last. We forget. And then we fear and we cry out, it's a ghost. Oh, it's all over. But if we remember to thank God for what He's done in the past he can do in the present, then we're fully satisfied. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you are a good God. Thank you that Jesus is the good shepherd. Thank you, he knows what we need. He loves us more than we can understand. Help us to love him and trust him back. Help us to take record of your blessings to us. As you say in Psalm 103, that we need not forget all your blessings to us. We thank you for this story of the Good Shepherd who provides